Welcome back to Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony. You know, one of the things that I've always believed that education is the great equalizer. But I also believe, and I'm going to test this theory with our next guest. You know, a lot of people talk about division sometimes as if it's a bad thing, but sometimes you need that contrary opinion to where you stand on issues. You know, but there is a story being repeated across this country that I believe has worn down the confidence of some parents. You know, it tells us that we are hopelessly divided. It tells that families cannot agree on what children should be taught. That classrooms have become battlegrounds where cultural tribes fight for this dominance. That is the narrative, right? Yet when you listen to real parents, especially here in Michigan, there's a very different truth that emerges. Families still want clarity. They still want innocence protected. They also want classrooms to be grounded in truth rather than ideology. Can we go back to that? But the deepest instincts of parents have not changed. What has changed is the noise around them. And you know, Michigan sits at the center of these cultural tremors. Curriculum secrecy, parental notification battles, gender policy conflicts, teachers who are afraid to speak, families feeling unheard. Yet beneath all of that tension is something hopeful. Michigan parents are discovering that they agree far more than the institutions around them suggest. What do they seek? Excellence, transparency, honesty, and respect for childhood. None of this grooming and all of that. That shared desire is not a weakness, it is a strength. The challenge is that we are living in a moment where the loudest voices often benefit from hiding that unity. Our guest today has spent years exposing that disconnect between perception and reality. His research challenges the story we have been told about who we are as a nation. He argues that division is not the natural posture of American families. And I would agree. It is the manufactured product of institutions that gain power through confusion. Jonathan Butcher is one of the most respected education scholars in the country. He serves as the Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Heritage Foundation. And you know I love the Heritage Foundation. He's the author of the Polarization Myth, which challenges the belief that America is fractured beyond repair, and presents some compelling data showing widespread agreement on issues of race, education, and the protection of children. His earlier book, Splintered, exposed the rise of critical race theory in public schools and the way it distorts truth and redirects the mission of education. He has co-edited influential works such as The Critical Classroom and The Not So Great Society. What did it reveal? How ideological pipelines enter schools and how federal expansion has reshaped early childhood. His voice is steady, evidence-based, and unafraid to confront the forces that shape the hearts and minds of America's children. Jonathan, welcome to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
I'm so glad to have you here. Now, Jonathan, let's start with your newest book. The argument, you argue that most Americans agree far more on issues like education, race, and childhood than we've been told. What discovery during your research most challenged that national narrative of deep division?
Well, we're told by so-called experts in the national media or those that, pontificate about everything from COVID to education that America is polarized, right? That we are split down the middle, and that if you have a particular position, especially on kitchen table conversations about, say, boys and girls bathrooms, right? Yeah. That you're somehow representing a fringe. But in fact, on the issues, Americans have very common sense opinions. We don't want boys playing on girls' sports teams. We don't want young children to be taught, quote, gender when they're in K through 3. We don't want racial preferences used in college admissions. So we had a nationally representative survey asking these questions and more, and we just found that on the issues that Americans are not, in fact, polarized.
Yeah. Now you write that much of the conflict we see, and I love this, is engineered by elites. I have been saying this for so long. Now, can you explain the mechanics of how elites create division in education, and who benefits most from the perception of this constant cultural warfare?
Well, I think when it comes to the classroom, you have teachers who come from colleges of education that train them to teach students to be advocates, right, to be warriors or to be social justice activists, right? The idea that young people should be taught facts and how to think deeply about the issues is replaced with, quote, child-centered learning, right, where students sort of direct the direction that their curriculum goes in. And this is, remnants of a progressive education era that goes back 100 years. And what we really need today, and what we found in our survey, is that parents want young people taught about character and virtue. In fact, 74% of our respondents in the general public want those things taught in school. They don't want students taught that they should conduct walkouts, that the only way to express disagreement is to shout down or silence someone that has a different opinion than them.
Yeah.
And so this is the way in which education has been, it's being used as a weapon, really, to train young people instead of teach young people.
Wow. I'm writing a book about it's called The Counterfeit Republic. And what I'm dealing a lot in the education and how just Dewey just completely destroyed our public education. We should have kept it the way it was as it relates to parent-centered education. But that's a whole nother thing. But I do believe that many Americans believe that the public education system is broken. That's why you hear President Trump, Secretary of Education Linda McMahon calling for basically the dismantling of the education. But from your research, is this a structural collapse or the outcome of a deliberate philosophical shift over decades?
Well, I think it's crucial to know that the president and the Department of Education, they're not trying to destroy education. They're trying to close the U.S. Department of Education, Washington's office, Washington's outpost for education, which it only accounts for less than 10% of the spending on every child in the U.S. It has heaps of paperwork to the extent of hundreds of millions of dollars in man hours every year that local schools have to spend just to receive federal spending.
Yeah.
So clearly from the last 45 years, we can tell that the department has not improved test scores. They haven't improved scores in reading or math. And so we should be turning the autonomy, the decision-making authority back to local schools and to parents. And by closing the U.S. Department of Education, that will give parents in local schools the ability to make choices about how children learn. So once you pair that with parental choice in education, whether it's interdistrict enrollment, right, choosing the public school that fits you best, or charter schools, which I know Michigan has, and then in other states, right, have private school scholarships, putting these two things together, right, a smaller federal footprint in education, removing it entirely eventually, and school choice, that is the path forward.
Wow. I did not know about your book, Splintered. I am going to definitely go out and buy it because critical race theory is something that I've talked about a lot on another show that I have called Black and Right. But in Splintered, you argue that critical race theory represents this war on truth. What is the single most dangerous philosophical claim CRT makes?
That your skin color is the most important thing about you, and that the only things about which you are allowed to speak or be engaged in or have an opinion on are things related to the color of your skin. Yeah. And this is straight from the key writings of critical race theorists. If you are not black, you cannot have an opinion or speak on issues that relate to black family. And the reality is that the history of Americans who are black is woven into American history, right? Yes. It is a part of American history. And the striving and overcoming of injustice and obstacles that Americans who are black have done time and time again over the last 150 years is something that America should be proud of, right? I mean, we should hold that up as an example of how America's founding ideals, they were not false when they were written, they were just falsely applied, right?
Yes.
In creating systemic injustice. And so now we should celebrate what the Civil Rights Act has helped to create. And when we see racism in American culture, which is a sad, terrible part, right, of the human condition, we can reject it and say, our government does not condone this. And as a people, we can reject this.
You know, Jonathan Butcher, I don't think people realize that CRT, it didn't enter classrooms through curriculum alone. I mean, it was teacher training, there was policy language, and then there was this thing called professional development. Tell me this. What pipeline allows academic ideology to reach kindergartners without parental consent?
Yeah. Well, so one of the critical race theorists who's worked in education for many years, Gloria Ladson-Billings, she's an emeritus professor just next door to you guys in Wisconsin. And she says that the K-12 school curriculum is a white supremacist master script. That's what she's called it. And so she has believed that the way in which we should describe K-12 education is a zero-sum game between those who are ethnic minorities and those who are not. And that's a core part of the critical race theory canon. Remember, critical race theory came from critical legal theory, which believes that America is systemically racist. And then critical legal theory itself came from critical theory, which is the attempt to apply Marxism to culture.
Yes.
Because remember, the Marxists back in the 1920s, Marxism was an economic theory, right? There was this battle between the business owner and the worker, and there needed to be revolution to overthrow this economic system. Well, critical theorists said Marxism needs an upgrade, and we need to apply Marxism not just to economics, not just to the workplace. It should be applied to culture, right? Art, education, everything around us, right, can only be described as a zero-sum game between those who have power and those who don't. And so critical race theory is 90 years later, right, or 70 years later, critical race theory is the application of this to race in the United States.
Oh, my God. You are talking, you are using language that I've written in my book, so let's move along until the book comes out. Because you're right. I had an argument, because there's some conservative attorneys that I've had arguments, black conservative attorneys that I've had arguments with over the years. And they always say, well, this started from black attorneys who were trying to figure this thing out. I said, no. It goes way further than just this group of black attorneys. It's rich in Marxism, but that was another question. But polling shows that there's an overwhelming agreement on not only parental notification, curriculum transparency, and child protection. Why do you think institutions resist these reforms the public clearly supports?
I just think it's the deep-seated progressive ideals that have been in education for so long. I mean, remember, one of the books that is so commonly used, one report has it as the third most used textbook in colleges of education, is a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is by a Brazilian Marxist named Paulo Freire.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with, K-12 education in the United States. It has to do with training people to resist oppressive police in Brazil. I mean, that's really what that's what that book is, but it's used as a way to train teachers to create activists among young people, right? And their young people are told that the world is built against them, that there are structures in society that must be resisted, and that's what Pedagogy of the Oppressed is all about. And that I think is so often used across K-12 schools. I'll tell you, it's a great message for Christmas today that Americans are not polarized on these key issues. In fact, one of the survey questions in my book asked if parents support the idea that we teach young people to finish high school, get a job, or enter a terminal degree in college, and get married before you have children. It's something called the success sequence. And Americans agreed, the general public and parents. They want these ideas taught to young people at age-appropriate levels, right? It's okay to tell young people that they could actually strive for something.
So true. If you're just joining the show, we're talking to Jonathan Butcher. He's the author of The Polarization Myth, America's Surprising Consensus on Race, Schools, and Sex. Jonathan, your book challenges the idea that the nation is split beyond repair. But here's the question. If the people are not the problem, what is?
Well, I think that there is, in the mainstream media and among the elite in universities who, write the studies that get covered by the New York Times and other mainstream media outlets, this pervasive idea that if their political interests are not represented, then America must be polarized, because they couldn't be wrong, right? The elites couldn't be wrong. It has to be something else, outside of them. And so they've been telling us for years that, after the most recent election, people were preparing for a civil war. Hollywood even made a movie called Civil War, where the White House is calling airstrikes on, Americans. It has to be something outside of the experts, right? America must have lost its way. But, the fact is, these are very common sense things about raising young people to understand responsibility, about the necessity of teaching civics in classrooms, and about, keeping boys out of girls' bathrooms in school. All these are common sense things that parents want and believe are important for protecting young people.
Jonathan, help me understand this. I'm a former state representative, and I sat on a lot of committees, and especially as it relates to criminal justice reform and things of that nature, right? So they told me in a committee hearing one time, kids are not old enough to understand until they're 24, 26 years old, but they're old enough to know what sexual identity they are. Why isn't that being challenged enough in schools?
Yeah, it isn't being challenged enough. The reality is that our brains are not fully formed until we're in our mid-20s. That may be true. But it's strange that we say a young person in, say, elementary school, they cannot diagnose themselves as having, pneumonia, or they can't diagnose themselves as having anxiety. However, if they say they're born in the wrong body, everyone agrees, right? The teachers will agree and socially affirm them. Counselors will agree and be afraid to challenge them. And it's just this bizarre medical mystery where we don't allow young people to diagnose themselves with anything else, but they can say that they were born in the wrong body. Yeah. And that is truly remarkable. Fortunately, the good news is that states around the U.S., starting in Florida, have adopted proposals that say you cannot teach young people the idea that sex is malleable or that gender is this construct. There are actually lawmakers and educators who are pushing against this. I think with a large number, as my book found, of parents behind them. In fact, I talked to a mom in California who actually went through this situation with her daughter, who said she was born in the wrong body, and she traced it back to what she was being taught in school. And she helped her child with empathy, with counseling, and eventually her child grew out of it. Yeah. And that's actually quite common, right? The research finds about anywhere from 60 to 90% of young people that have these struggles grow out of it once they finish puberty and enter their 20s.
Let's talk about the teachers really quickly, because I've talked to Michigan teachers, and they express a lot of private frustration, but they fear the consequences. What do you think needs to change culturally or structurally to allow teachers to start speaking honestly?
I think there needs to be a widespread understanding that teacher unions are pushing the most radical ideas in K-12 schools. There's a chapter in my book talking about the history of teacher unions. These unions support causes that are well outside the pale of what the average American, supports. They take positions on nuclear energy, on foreign policy, on things that have nothing to do with the working conditions of actual teachers. In fact, research finds that a small fraction, less than 10% of the NEA's budget, so the largest union in the country, is actually used on the working conditions of their teachers. The rest of their money is spent on political causes, radical left organizations, and left of center politicians. Yeah. This is what unions do, right? They are ready-made political action committees.
Yeah. Jonathan, we got about a minute left, but I want you to speak comfort to the parents that are out there listening to this show today as it relates to their children, education. What are some of the how can they fight back? How can they push back? I know you probably go out and get your book to be educated and have the tools to do so. But we got about a minute left. Tell me, what do you think parents should do?
First, know that they're not alone. There are thousands, millions of parents across the United States that don't want their young daughter to be threatened by a man in a private space. They want civics taught more in classrooms, especially about America's founding ideals. You can go to your school board and confidently say that you are not alone. And that's a great place to start. go to your child's teacher and say, I don't want my child taught that their skin color is the most important thing about them. And just know that you are not alone.
Where can people get your book, and can they follow you anywhere?
You can follow me on social media at JM_Butcher. And my book's available now on Amazon.com or anywhere books are sold.
All right, Jonathan Butcher, I want to thank you so much for such a solid conversation on just this myth about division that's happening in our country. I really appreciate you coming on today, sir.
Thank you.
All right, that's Jonathan Butcher, author of The Polarization Myth, America's Surprising Consensus on Race, Schools, and Sex. Go out and get it wherever books are sold. You're listening to Detroit's Morning Answer. Don't go anywhere. Hour 2 coming up next.